There's a quiet moment most people miss. It happens when you're lying awake at night, replaying decisions you've already made, worrying about choices you haven't made yet, and feeling strangely responsible for outcomes that aren't fully in your control. You care deeply about your family, your future, your work, your reputation, and somewhere in that quiet tension, you wonder why building wealth feels so heavy for you, while others seem to do it with calm, almost effortless patience. What if the problem isn't your discipline or intelligence, but the way you've been taught to care? There's an old Chinese principle that doesn't sound like a money rule at first. In fact, it sounds almost emotional. It's the idea of planting trees whose shade you will never sit under. At its core, it's a philosophy of delayed emotional reward. You act today without needing immediate validation tomorrow. You build quietly, steadily, without demanding that the world acknowledge you right now. This rule has shaped dynasties, businesses, and generational wealth. But it also reveals something uncomfortable about modern psychology, especially for people who care too much. If you're someone who feels everything deeply, you're wired for immediacy. Not because you're impulsive, but because your nervous system is tuned to feedback. You notice reactions. You sense approval and disappointment. Your brain releases dopamine when effort is seen and appreciated. Neuroscience shows that for highly empathetic people, social validation activates reward centers more strongly. That means waiting feels harder, silence feels heavier, long-term payoff feels emotionally distant. Wealth, however, grows in silence. The Chinese rule is simple but emotionally brutal. Do the right thing repeatedly without needing proof that it's working. Save when no one applauds. Invest when it feels boring. Learn when others are celebrating. Say no when you could impress someone by saying yes. This rule doesn't just build money, it builds emotional muscle. And that's where most people who care too much struggle, not because they're weak, but because they've been praised their whole lives for being responsive, generous, and present. You've probably felt this conflict before. You want to invest, but your family needs help. You want to save, but you don't want to look selfish. You want to think long-term, but your heart pulls you into short-term emotional obligations. Psychology calls this empathic overextension. You prioritize emotional harmony now at the expense of structural security later, and then you quietly resent yourself for not moving faster, even though you know you were trying to be a good person. What the Chinese understood long before modern behavioral science is that wealth is less about aggressive accumulation and more about emotional restraint. Not coldness, restraint. The ability to feel the urge to react and choose not to. The ability to delay comfort without numbing yourself. This is why patience is so often linked with prosperity in Eastern philosophy. It's not spiritual fluff. It's psychological strategy. There's a metaphor often used in Chinese teachings about water carving stone. Water never rushes. It doesn't force. It doesn't announce itself. But over time, it shapes mountains. People who care too much often try to be fire. Intense, bright, immediate. Fire gets attention. Water gets results. Wealth behaves like water, quiet, persistent, unimpressed by urgency. But here's the part no one talks about. Caring too much isn't a flaw. It's a strength that's just misdirected. Your sensitivity means you notice patterns others ignore. You feel risk before it shows up on paper. You understand people, timing, and nuance. When paired with the Chinese rule of delayed reward, that sensitivity becomes lethal in the best way. You stop reacting and start positioning. There is, of course, a shadow side. Some people use long-term thinking as emotional avoidance. They become distant, withholding, overly rigid. They sacrifice connection for control. That's not wealth, that's armor. The goal isn't to stop caring. It's to stop letting care override structure. True wealth is when your compassion has boundaries and your patience has purpose. Behavioral economics shows that most people fail financially not because of bad math, but because of emotional leakage. Small decisions made to relieve discomfort in the moment. A purchase to soothe stress. A loan to avoid guilt. A missed investment because waiting felt unbearable. The Chinese rule quietly asks you to sit with discomfort without turning it into action. To let the urge pass. To trust time. Think about how different your life would feel if you didn't need immediate emotional return on every effort. If you could work without applause. Save without praise. Grow without explanation. That's when wealth starts compounding. Not just financially, but psychologically. Your nervous system calms. Your decisions slow down. You stop chasing and start building. And something unexpected happens when you live this way. People begin to feel your stability. They don't know why, but they trust you more. You're less reactive, less performative, less drained. This is the quiet confidence that often gets mistaken for luck. In reality, it's the result of years of unseen consistency. The Chinese rule isn't glamorous. It won't go viral. It doesn't promise quick wins or overnight success. It asks you to be okay with being misunderstood for a while. To look average while becoming exceptional. For people who care too much, this is terrifying at first. But it's also liberating. You're no longer living for immediate emotional feedback. You're living for alignment. Wealth, in this sense, becomes a byproduct of emotional maturity, of knowing when to act and when to wait, of caring deeply, but not urgently, of loving people without financing every feeling, of building a future that doesn't require constant explanation. And maybe that's the real lesson hidden inside this ancient rule, that the greatest investment isn't money, it's your ability to wait without losing yourself, to care without collapsing, to plant something today knowing you may never sit in its shade, but someone you love will. So the question isn't whether you care too much. The question is where your care is going. Is it feeding short-term comfort or long-term freedom? Is it buying relief or building legacy? Tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself gently, what am I planting that I don't need to see grow right away? And am I finally willing to trust time enough to let it do its quiet work?